tonight lifts the veil on a kind of invisible war. China unleashing its full spy power on American power grids and the wealth of American manufacturing. A new report even locates this building in Shanghai. It doesn't look threatening, but what are they doing inside, and what does it mean for America's national security? Here's ABC's chief investigative correspondent, Brian Ross.
The Chinese People's Liberation Army has more than 2 million personnel. But it is the 1,000 or so in this nondescript building in Shanghai that may pose the biggest threat to the U.S. This is the headquarters of the Army's secretive unit number 61398, where, according to the new report today by the Mandiant security firm, English-speaking computer experts spend their days stealing secrets from U.S. companies and hacking into government sites.
This is an espionage operation run by the Chinese People's Liberation Army, and it's targeting a broad swath of Western organizations.
Among the most troubling targets, American infrastructure sites, including water treatment plants, transportation control centers, pipelines, and power grids.
The only reason you would want to get into the control system for the power grid is to cause damage, destruction, and disruption.
Among the many corporate targets of the Chinese hackers, according to U.S. officials, Lockheed Martin, the country's largest defense contractor and the maker of the F-35 jet fighter. U.S. officials say, not surprisingly, the Chinese version of the plane has some distinct similarities.
It's costing, according to U.S. intelligence, hundreds of billions of dollars and thousands of U.S. jobs every year.
The White House today confirmed the severity, although not the details, of the Chinese cyber espionage.
We have repeatedly raised our concerns at the highest levels about cyber theft with senior Chinese officials.
But China remains in denial, according to ABC's Gloria Riviera in Beijing.
Today in China, the Defense Ministry denied any wrongdoing, saying the military has never supported any form of hacking activity. But when a BBC News team tried to film the building outside Shanghai, military personnel confiscated the footage.
Of course, the U.S. is believed to be doing its own cyber attacks on Iran and its nuclear program. But officials say that is different than the economic espionage China is conducting. And President Obama has now ordered government agencies to help American companies spot and deter hackers from that secret army building in Shanghai. Diane.
All right, Brian Ross, thank you.
Well, here's the tragedy. We are in a cyber war. Cyber war was declared on America by China 2 years ago. Nobody noticed. Just because they didn't put it in the front page of the newspaper, China declares war on the U.S., does not mean we're not at war. They have attacked Homeland Security, the FBI, the CIA, and with the Office of Program Management, have taken 14 million records. There's been no greater coup of warfare since warfare was first invented. Now, we are at war. Our leadership is too asleep or too something to have even noticed it, or they're not telling us that they know that they're at war. They don't act like it. We are hosting the Chinese premiere today here in America, or at least this week. And I promise you, we're not going to give them sanctions. We're not going to ban their ships from our ports. We're acting like we're not at war. But China knows, and they're just waiting. They can push a button any moment and shut off our electricity, bring down our airplanes, take control of our automobiles, and we will be back in the Stone Age. War has been declared. I'm sorry. I don't want to bring bad news to the world. We are at war. It's just that we on our side haven't armed ourselves.
The two Chinese telecommunications companies could be a threat to the national security of the United States. That's the conclusion by the House Intelligence Committee after a year-long probe of Huawei and ZTE.
We do not have the confidence that these two companies, with their ties to the Chinese government, can be entrusted with infrastructure of such critical importance.
The committee has no proof of any wrongdoing, but its chairman claims the companies could be a kind of Trojan horse, allowing the Chinese government to gather intelligence or strike the U.S. with a cyber war. The committee is urging American companies as well as U.S. government systems and contractors to find other vendors. But Huawei tells CNN the committee is just trying to poke China in the eye on cyber attacks by holding its company hostage.
Huawei is Huawei. Huawei is not China. Whatever concerns that the committee or the U.S. government has with the state the government of another state, or vice versa, has nothing to do with my company. And my company should not be held hostage to someone's political agenda.
Huawei is one of the biggest information communications technology providers in the world, a $30 billion firm with 120,000 employees worldwide, operating in 140 countries. With 1,700 employees in the U.S., it provides telecommunications infrastructure as well as phones and tablets. Its founder was an engineer in the Chinese Army nearly 3 decades ago, but the company denies any ties with Chinese intelligence. The congressional committee, Huawei says, made up its mind even before the hearings began. A statement on the company's website says the committee's report not only ignored our proven track record of network security in the United States and globally, but also paid no attention to the large amount of facts that we have provided. The congressionally created U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission found that Huawei receives funding from the Chinese military for research and development of cyber, communications, and intelligence gathering systems. But Huawei calls that charge patently false.
Well, a new White House report finds economic cyber espionage is on the rise, pointing the finger at China as the biggest culprit. Beijing says the study is, quote, groundless, but now a cybersecurity firm says that it has tracked the source of several attacks, including against the U.S. government, to a single Chinese government building outside Shanghai, housing a secret military unit. So, with both private and public institutions allegedly under cyber assault, are Chinese hackers our newest national security threat? Joining me now is Christian Whiten. He is a former State Department senior advisor and a principal at DC International Advisory. Thank you so much for joining us.
Heather, great to be here.
So how big is this threat to our national security, and does this really amount to, electrical weapons of mass destruction?
Yeah, it's a big threat. It's not a new threat. Basically, China is just updating for the 21st century things that U.S. adversaries have always done, basically espionage and sabotage. In times of relative peace, our adversaries try and steal our secrets using espionage, not just national security secrets, but also trade and economic ones. And then there's the sabotage part. Basically, what China is preparing to do, or wants to be prepared to do, is to inflict a 21st century Pearl Harbor on us at a time of their choosing. The problem with the report that's out from the White House is it's a bit of an exercise in stating the obvious, and also a bit of the fine Washington tradition of covering one's posterior without actually recommending a course of action.
Well, and Christian, I also want to talk about this report that came out by this cybersecurity firm, Mandiant, I think is how you say it. It focused primarily on state-sponsored thievery of proprietary data, but in the report, it was about 76 pages long, I think. It also mentioned almost in passing the penetration of American energy structures, specifically our aging electrical grid.
That's right. What that really is, it's true. The Chinese would most like to target in a sabotage attack, if you will, U.S. critical infrastructure. So what's the worst case scenario? Well, the lights could go out, which means 911 calls would not get answered, which means banks would close, ATMs wouldn't work, critical services, first responders wouldn't be able to know where to go or be called upon, food services wouldn't be delivered, you couldn't lift gasoline out of tanks at pumps, things like that. So really a potentially devastating attack if it could work, and we've seen the potential of this, frankly, in Iran, where allied efforts to set back that nuclear program have really been quite effective. So this is a very real threat. And the question is how we're going to address it. Is it going to be purely defensive, trying to harden networks here in the U.S., or are we going to go on the offensive and make it known to people like the People Liberation Army, the Chinese Army, that there's a consequence to doing this to the United States?
And Christian, you mentioned the White House not really saying what they're going to do. Just very quickly as we wrap up, what do you think they should do?
Well, I would go on the offensive. The problem with the President's State of the Union remarks on cybersecurity and the executive order he issued is that it doesn't mention the Chinese and doesn't mention U.S. Cyber Command. Instead, it looked like an exercise in giving more and more power to the Department of Homeland Security, not the Energy Department, but the bureaucrats in pork dispensers at DHS. We need Cyber Command to be in charge of this, and we need a code of conduct where the Chinese realize if they steal our secrets and if they probe us for a possible attack, then we'll do the same in kind. And last but not least, we need the federal government to stop letting Chinese companies acquire U.S. companies that have sensitive technology.
And basically, you know, call a spade a spade. If China's the one doing it, then, you know, do something about it. Thank you. Christian White, we appreciate it. We appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
A serious question from Washington. There are new allegations this morning of a serious breach of American military secrets.
That's right. A confidential report first obtained by the Washington Post says Chinese cyber spies gained access to the designs for dozens of major U.S. weapons systems. David Martin is in Washington. David, good morning. And how serious is this?
Well, it's very serious, Charlie and Nora. This report put together by the Defense Science Board is a veritable who's who of the weapons that will be involved in President Obama's so-called Pacific pivot, where you take the weight of the U.S. military away from the wars of the past decade and move them into the Pacific, where, of course, the main competitor is China. And the report says that the Chinese hackers have gained access to data on a number of these weapon systems, and they include 3 missile defense systems. There's one high-altitude defense system, one low-altitude defense system, and a ship-based defense system. There is a new Navy ship called the Littoral Combat Ship, which just deployed to Singapore. The Marines' Osprey aircraft, which takes off like a helicopter and flies like an airplane, was also compromised, and that is just now being deployed in Japan. And there was the F-18 jet fighter, which is the Navy's primary carrier aircraft. So these are not just any weapons. These are weapons which all have a very specific role in the Pacific pivot and would be of particular interest to China in coming up with ways to counter them.